So Shabbat Shalom. So the Parashat is Korach, and really you have a bunch of Levites, that 250, led by Korach and led by Datan and Aviram. Or if you saw the movie, Dathan, played by Edward G. Robinson, who really is kind of a combination of Korach and Datan, but he plays a really good bad guy. And they challenged Moses' leadership. And so Moses then, he sets up a test of power, right? He tells them, you bring incense and fire pans, and whoever God chooses, that'll be the holy person. And if God makes our fire pan, if he sends flame to our fire pan, we're the chosen ones. If he sends flame to your fire pan, you guys are the chosen one. And then the ground opens up and swallows them, and they go down to Sheol alive. Okay, or as one of my professors in rabbinical school, the late Dr. Ellis Rifkin, who was kind of an interesting character, who said that they were Sheol, right? And anybody who's been in a position of leadership has sometimes wished for the possibility that the people who challenge your leadership would be shielded. But it doesn't seem to work that way anymore. Okay. But what's interesting is that Moses' anger at this is somewhat atypical, right? I mean, a couple of partials earlier, there's another challenge to Moses. And Moses goes to God and asks him to appoint 70 more prophets, right? And 70 people start prophesying in the camp, and then that's supposed to be over, and these two guys, Eldad and Nadab, keep prophesying anyway, and Joshua is upset. And he goes to Moses and he says, Eldad and Nadab are still prophesying. Adoni Moshe Kehilat. My Lord Moses, throw them in jail. Right? My Lord Moses, lock them up. Right? And Moses responds to God, what, are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all of the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his spirit on them. Right? So a couple of chapters ago, Moses wants everyone to be prophets, but here, Korach and his gang complain that Moses shouldn't have any special position. I mean, what is Korach complain? What does he say? All people are holy, and God dwells in their midst. Right? Is there anything objectionable to that statement? Actually, all God's people are holy, and God dwells in their midst. But Moses flips out, and the earth opens up and swallows them. Okay, now, what's the difference? Okay, one possible explanation is that Korach and his followers, they were already Levim, they were already Levites, right? So they already had an opportunity to serve, right? But they weren't satisfied with being able to serve, they wanted to rule. Right? And it's interesting. I mean, if you look at people, politicians, right? I mean, it's an interesting thing to ask yourself. Is this guy running for office, or is this guy in office? because he wants to serve? Or is this guy running for office or in office because he wants to rule? Right? And I have to say, when I look at a candidate, I mean, I'm not sure that I ever consciously articulated that to myself right now. Right? But I could easily vote for somebody with whom I disagree on significant issues if they were a person who wanted to serve. Right? I mean, just to throw a name out there, right? Will Hurd. Right? I am sure that if Will Hurd and I sat down, we would agree on some issues, but disagree on many more. But I could see myself voting because he strikes me, based on his own history, as somebody who was in this to serve and not to rule. Right? His idea of what is good for the nation may be different in some respects than mine, what is good for the nation. But he's clear, unless there are things about him that we don't know, right? Now, he was in the CIA, so maybe there are things about him that we don't know, but he strikes me as somebody who seeks to serve and not to rule, right? And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the late Rabbi Sachs, in his commentary on this Parashat, says that this is the difference between power and influence. Okay? When you have, Rabbi Sachs points out there's a rabbinic hermeneutic principle that if you have two texts that contradict, how do you resolve the contradiction between these two texts? Okay, if you go to Minyan in the morning, right? This is the last principle, the last of Rabbi Yitno's 13 hermeneutic principles. Right? Okay, what does that mean? If you have two texts that contradict each other, the only way to resolve it is a third text that resolve the contradiction, right? So what are the two texts that contradict each other? Right, the Eldad and Medad story, where God says, I want everybody to be holy, right? Where Moses says, rather, I want everybody to be holy. And then the Korach story, where Korach goes and says to Moses, everybody be holy. And Moses flips out on them, right? So where's the third text that resolves this contradiction? Okay, and Rabbi Sachs says it's later in Numbers when Moses appoints Joshua as his successor. Okay, now first of all, what is unique about Joshua being Moses' successor? Right? Does that strike anybody as weird? Let me throw this out. Why, I mean, does Moses not have sons? He does, right? Moses has two sons. Moses has two sons, but Moses' successors are not his sons, right? It's Joshua, because the successorship is not hereditary, it's based on merit. Right, so now God, Moses, take Joshua son of Nun, a man of spirit, and lay your hand on him. Make him stand before Eleazar the priest and the entire assembly and commission him in your presence. Give him some of your splendor so that the whole Israelite community will obey it. Okay, so Moses here does two different things. He said, lay your hands on Joshua, and then it's give him some of your splendor. Right now, what's the difference between laying on of hands and giving of splendor? I mean, you could say there is no difference, right? It's just a phrase like rules and regulations. right? I mean, we all use like rules and regulations, right? I suppose if you know, really follow it, there's a difference between rules and regulations, but you have to follow all the rules and regulations, right? Or my Uncle Max used to say that some food has all the vitamins and minerals. Now, yes, there's vitamins and there's minerals and they're not the same thing, but you know, it's just a phrase that Uncle Max used, right? But that's not the way the rabbis use, right? In Midrash Rabbah, they say, lay your hands on him. This is like lighting one candle from another. Give him some of your splendor. This is like pouring from one vessel to another. Okay, what's the difference between lighting a candle from another candle and pouring liquid into a vessel from another vessel? What's the difference?
Diminishes
Zachor or Shai, either one.
one diminishes, the other does not.
Right, I'm not sure I completely heard you well, but one is infinite, but the other is not, right? I mean, if you light a candle from another candle, the first candle stays, right? If you pour from one vessel into another vessel, right, unless you're like Elisha the prophet, right? The first vessel has left, right? It's an infinite, it's a finite amount, right? So when Moses laid his hands on Joshua, he gave him some of his influence, but when he gave his splendor or his authority, that's political or corrosive power, right? Korach already had influence. What he wanted was authority, right? And, you know, so here's facts, you know, ever the British gentleman paraphrases Shakespeare. The influence we have lives after us. The power is oft interred with our bones, right? And he says that Judaism is an extended essay on the supremacy of prophets over kings, right over might, teaching rather than coercion, influence in place of power, right? And if you look at it, I mean, and you see this playing out all the time, right? If I have no influence, I try to exercise raw power, right? I mean, you know, why, for example, are there so many, it's the first anniversary of the Dobbs, right? Why do we have a raft of anti-abortion legislation in our country, right? And by the way, I mean, many heard, this is a difficult issue, right? Because there are millions of people in this country who fully and legitimately and faithfully believe that abortion is murder. That's what they believe, right? And what are you supposed to do? So, wow, you know, hundreds of thousands of murders are committed every year, but don't do anything about it. But on the other hand, the overwhelming majority of Americans don't believe it, right? And they support at least some access to abortion, right? And if you're really opposed to abortion, the way to change the situation is to change people's hearts and minds, right? Is to change people's hearts and minds. And if you can't change people's hearts and minds, you pass laws, right? But you know, but it's true in almost anything. I mean, if you look, you know, why did so many of the laws in our country vis-a-vis gay people change? Because people's hearts and minds change, right? A week from today, recreational marijuana becomes legal in Maryland. Why? Because people's attitudes change, right? And when people's attitudes change, the law follows it, right? And you can't really force a change on people who are unwilling to go along, right? And what you need is influence and not power, right? And if you look, I mean, people certainly on the board have heard me say this, right? If you push through something that most people in the school don't support, right? You push something controversial through by a vote of 12 to 11. Have you won? No, you haven't won, right? You need 20 to 3, right? Then maybe you won, right? But you can't, push stuff through when people are unwilling to follow. It works. Right, so, as Rabbi Sachs says, right, for only a small fraction of our history have Jews had power. But at all times they have had an influence over the civilization of the West. People still contend for power, if only we would realize how narrow its limits are. It is one thing to force people to behave in a certain way, quite another to teach them to see the world differently so that of their own accord they act in a new way. The use of power diminishes others, the exercise of influence enlarges. Right, that is one of Judaism's most humanizing truths. Not all of us have power, but we all are capable of being an influence for good, right? And the last point that I want to make on that, and then we'll go on to the third, is that really the most successful leaders, right? You get people to do something that they don't want to do by convincing them that it's their idea, right? You convince them that it's their idea, and then when you convince them that it's their idea, they own it, and they follow wholeheartedly. But if you try to force people, and you just exercise raw power rather than influence, right? Then, even if you win, you've lost, right? And I really do think, these two questions, right? Is this person seeking to serve or seeking to rule? And is this person exercising influence or exercising power? I mean, that dynamic is widespread in our society. Ultimately, service and influence will win out over power and ruling, but it may take. All right, Shabbat Shalom.
Fourth service is on page 139.
Right, so we continue with the Torah service 139 in the Shabbat keyboard 394 full.
En kamocha ba'Elohim Adonai ve'en kema'aseh.